Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nexus Mountain Network podcast, live version. Tonight, we have an amazing guest doing amazing work, and she's going to teach us and inspire us not only to maybe do what she's doing, but really catch a hold of what God's called you to do. And she will explain her story, the steps she's taken. Let me tell you a little bit about Elizabeth Good. We're glad you're with us tonight. If you are watching live, you can go and make comments and ask questions because some of the things we're going to talk about tonight need a lot of clarity, and we have an expert here to do it. So Elizabeth Good is the CEO and founder of the Foundation United. She has been a leader in the anti-trafficking movement since 2011. She has learned so much, we were talking before the show, that now she's modified the approach to get a greater effect. And she's going to explain that for us too. She has a focus on systemic change versus just trying to figure out one person at a time, but what can we do collectively to make a difference? She has experience in corporate America and being a pastor, which I love that, both in ministry and business. And we talk a lot about primary and secondary mountains in the Nexus Mountain Network. And lastly, I encourage you to watch her TED Talk or TEDx as well on this subject. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Chad.
So we're really thrilled to have you. The things that we're going to talk about tonight, they're of a serious nature, but they're serious solutions. So before we actually get into some of those things, would you mind just tell the audience about you?
Well, here's a quick little summary of how I got into trafficking. I moved from Chicago to do nothing because I was exhausted from being an area pastor at Willow Creek Community Church. I was in the North Shore of Chicago and just exhausted. Moved down to do nothing. Asked what an underdog charity we could raise some money for as part of a women's event, and was told in 2010 our local children are being sold for sex. And you know what? I think, but the 3 decades that you described, from corporate to ministry to anti-sex trafficking, the last 10 years, they sort of make my life make sense, because what I've learned is in corporate America, everything's sort of crazy. No one pretends to be anything. They look at porn, they cheat on their wives, they talk about it, they don't hide it. And then
That's true.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's sort of refreshing. And then in the megachurch world, there's just underlying, couldn't really hit it all. But then in the anti-sex trafficking, there was so much brokenness, and it was just out there. But it was the same brokenness in my very wealthy ministry days. It just, the symptoms are different. Trafficking was a symptom, and the North Shore wealthy was shopping or different things. But the root of secrets. And so I think being in these places made my life make sense. So to know who I am is to understand, like, I was a girl that was raised in the church and love with God, like was Baptist by, during the regular year with my dad's family. And then in the summer, my mom's family was Holiness Pentecostal, like in the country. So I was raised like Awana Girl of the Year, sword drill queen, like loving the Bible, knowing the Bible. But every summer it's like, woo, praying in tongues, jumping around church, all crazy town, and just fun. Like it was all comfortable for me. But then I was abused in the church sexually in the Holiness Pentecostal, and it just shut me down to that stream. And so like I see now, like from where I stand today, 55 years later, the enemy tried to kill my purpose, my passion. I was born for the church. I was born for family. I was born for like getting in there and talking about the hard stuff. And I was almost taken out so young with so much hard stuff. I lost a sister tragically. I had abuse, which led to just shame because it comes on you. And then, then you do things that you regret and you try to cover that shame, then more shame, then more shame. And then all of a sudden it's like, who am I? Which is basically what a trafficking girl is. And I'm like, she's no different than me. She's no different than your daughter. She's no different. So I think the Lord has shown me everybody has something. And if we don't get over here, so I feel like who I am today and who I am is back to like when I was a child, before I was abused, like the heart of that perfect passion for the Lord of everybody matters so much. And most of us are taken out before we realize we're in a battle. And that was me. I struggled for decades before the Lord did a radical, crazy healing, which I'm sure I'll tell you about later. But I am like almost like childlike in faith again because of what God's done.
Gosh, man. Well, I didn't know this about you, but you and I talked before the show, and I gave you like a 15-second version of my story. And I remember going through, let's call it hell. And I remember going through it and how much pain was going on during the season of hell. And to hear you say that and say decades later. So I have to understand. So how did you go decades? And then, I want to talk about that story, because before we talk about what you do and how you do it, let's talk about that healing part, because that is so amazing that people can have hope that maybe someone's watching right now who, the statistics better than I do, and you can probably tell us here in a second, but what are the statistics of a child being abused in some manner? And then what are the chances they actually come out?
Yeah, well, there's so many stats. I could tell you so many things. 1 out of 2 kids today endure abuse, right? So it's 1 out of 2. So that's literally 1 billion children. We have 2 billion children in the world, 1 billion. So I was one of the, 1 billion, half of the children that go through emotional, verbal, sexual, physical, any of the things, neglect. I went through probably all of them. But what I've learned is almost everybody's gone through at least one. They say 1 out of 2, but I don't know. I think that's reported. I think almost everybody's gone through something. So for me, I think, and it's funny because I'm on different shows all the time. They're like, how do you talk about this stuff? And you're so hopeful. Like we leave feeling so encouraged. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've seen what God could do. Like nothing's hopeless. And it's almost like once you unlock the secret sauce and help people understand what the battle is, it's just accelerated freedom. It's crazy. So, I mean, and no one told me. I didn't have the keys. I didn't have the path. We call them off ramps. No one had given off ramps when I was little. And I literally, my mom has just been failing and we moved her down here. And when I was clearing out her house, I found like all my old journals and all these things. And they were literally from the age that almost everything I work on now helps people realize something happened here. And you're focused on the symptom here, but it's here. And I'm reading this now going, how depressing and sad, because I didn't even know, but I wrote, I never stopped. So I was one of those like closet Jesus people, because even when I was in my darkest of dark and I was labeled promiscuous, like I went from church girl to basically like a middle school slut, which is ridiculous because there's no such thing. You're a little girl that has everything stolen and you just don't care anymore. But as I'm reading through this stuff, I just saw that I didn't have any idea what to do. And it's just a miracle. So I think that the Lord, I almost am grateful because I feel like I could relate to every age, every stage, every problem. I feel like I've had them all. And he waited till I was 34 to give me a big breakthrough. But all of my secrets and shame, and like Columbia University says, the average person has 13 secrets at any given time, 5 of which we've never spoken out loud to another human being. And those really have to deal with sexual something, perversion, shame, or just, and it's interesting because I lead these, part of what we do now for the Solution for the Church is leading these groups called Real Talk. And people come in like leaders from all over the world, literally, we'll share more, but they don't think they have anything. And then all of a sudden it's like, but as it comes up, it unlocks another level. So the Lord, for me, I never missed church. I mean, I was in all this pain, but I showed up every Sunday. No one knew what I was carrying. No one knew how unreconciled my life was, because when you grow up learning how to do church and you have trauma, but no one helps you, off ramp the trauma, you know how to bury your trauma, try harder. You know how it is when you're fighting, but you're struggling.
Yeah.
But you still know how to do church, but you're sort of dead inside. Like I was 2 people. I was very much 2 people, but I looked really good at my facade. And I didn't get reconciled. So I was 34 and it was the effort, the effort to keep showing up looking good when you didn't feel it. And I didn't even know what was wrong because I didn't even have language. But before I too got sick and I had physical in a pregnancy that I could have bled out. The baby could have died. I was about to go on bed rest. And the Lord, that's when he got me, because I was desperate. And I had a lot of judgments. I always say, be careful of your judgments. They're never vows. And whatever you judge is probably exactly where your healing is meant to be and will be part of your purpose. But I hated that whole stream. And so literally when I was sick, I was invited to a healing mass. So I not only had problems with the charismatic stream from being little, but I had things in the Catholic stream that I was like, ooh, don't like them either. The Lord invited me. I'm going to say the Lord, because who else can make this happen? I was invited to a healing mass, and it was a Catholic priest. And when he asked why I was there, I lied to him because I didn't believe a Catholic priest could have the gift of healing, because healing was bad enough, and throw a Catholic in. I'm like, what are you talking about? So he goes, oh, you've never seen a completed Catholic. I'm like, what? And he said, you've never seen a Catholic speak in tongues, be able to pray for healing? I'm like,
Really?
Oh yeah. And it was the Lord saying, judge not, little girl. I was 34, but he was like, I'm going to fix this. And because someone had spoken to me that I had an ecumenical anointing. I didn't even know what that meant. But if I did not get the healing, not just physically, but in all of the places that I had judgments, they would have blocked what I'm called to today. So I had a charismatic Catholic priest walk me through confession, like the real deal confession. Because he's like, he was trying to pray for me. And he's like, I feel like there's something, because I had a problem with my pregnancy. And he goes, I can't pray. He goes, I feel like there's something blocking your pregnancy.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, this guy stinks. He can't get it. What's that about? And he goes, it feels like it's with another baby and you haven't forgiven yourself or forgiven God. And I'm like, oh, no, he's horrible. And then he goes, I feel like it's more of a sin. And you know what? My layer upon layer of shame led me to having an abortion when I was 17. And this was 17 years later. And he's like, oh, he goes, have you ever confessed it? I go, dude, I'm not Catholic. We don't do confession.
Wow.
He goes, James 5:16. Do you read the Bible? Pray for a righteous man, confess your sins one to another. Pray for a righteous man has authority to heal. And I'm like, oh,
Wow.
yeah. He goes, so you want to be done with it? And I'm like, yeah. So he prayed over me, starts anointing me with oil, speaking in tongues. I'm like, oh my gosh. I had locked that away since I was
Wow.
young. And it led to him, saying, okay, you've been forgiven. And he talked about me doing penance. And I'm like, penance again, not Catholic. He goes, you've had some secrets. You know what penance is? It's walking out. It's helping you learn new soul patterns. It's giving you some steps. I'm like, what? And so he just went on, and he went through more open doors that I hadn't cleaned out, that I didn't even know they were there. Called out things like pornography, which I had, come with my abuse, and idolatry. He really went, basically Revelations 22:15 talks about outside the doors of heaven are the dogs, the perversion, the perverted, the idolaters, the sorcerers, the murderers, like my things that I hadn't realized were secrets because I was just surviving, were all things that needed to be brought to the light, confessed, forgiven, released, so I could be restored and I could be reconciled. So this crazy encounter with this guy like reconciled my life, and it was embarrassing because I was already a pastor at Willow.
Wow.
I was on stage, but the Bible says the gifts are without repentance. And that's why today, like who I am is somebody desperately passionate to protect the church, because all these leaders that are getting removed, I don't think we all know we're unreconciled. We're really good at doing church.
Yeah.
And we have some stuff that we've tucked far away. So my passion is helping to reconcile to quickly. The Lord's brought this secret sauce of how we do things to help bring it up and out. So that's who I am. I'm a guardian for the church, for your ministry, for your legacy, for your purpose, because I think it's almost textbook how it gets locked away.
I can't, I do these interviews and I really enjoy them. And sometimes I get caught up in the person's story and I forget that I'm interviewing. And a lot of times I go, okay, what should I ask next? Where should this go? And I got lost in your story because it was already powerful. Like you just have this raw about you that is probably relatable. And I can't imagine, and something that stuck out to me at the very beginning, you said people have on average 13 secrets. 5 of them have never been spoken. So what does someone do? Like if let's say that the average person has 13, like I don't think I do, but I don't think I do, but if I sat down for a long time, maybe I have something, I don't know. But okay, let's say I do, or someone's watching. I see people on here now watching, Allison's watching, Art's watching, Wendy's watching. Like what if they have 13?
Well, we would want to invite them into Real Talk. It's called Real Talk, and it is a tool that helps people unlock it. It's literally just 5 sessions, and it's shocking what happens. Like I am a therapist, right? But I can tell you what, this is not therapy. It's the Holy Spirit saying we have very little time left. Let's go. And it's been put together in a package that, we have leaders on from Dubai, Netherlands, Germany, Philippines, like leaders from around the world that are jumping into it because they're starving to get real. They've done church for so long and they don't even know what it is, but they know there's something. And it's like, we're such a beautiful, beautiful hunger. I think the church is hungry. I think we've seen a lot of hypocrisy. We've seen a lot of deadness. There's nothing really happening. We just look good. And it's almost like a piece of the revival of opening people up. So I say, if anybody wants it, it's, yes, can it protect you from sexual, headlines being in your ministry? Sure, it definitely can, because we can help your leaders go through it and make sure, see what's under the hood. But it can unlock purpose so that the world's not missing out on who you were created to be.
Real Talk has a perfect name for you already. I'm just picking that up within a few minutes, and I'm sure you're really good at it. And I just want to talk to the audience and say, hey, if you're watching right now, we're about to get into some topics. We're going to dive a little bit deeper. If you have questions, put them in the chat as you're watching, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. So you've had a very strong focus on. I actually put it out there as human trafficking, which is different, I guess, and then sex trafficking. So help us. What is sex trafficking versus maybe even human trafficking? I know there's a couple other trafficking categories.
Yeah. Well, human trafficking is the umbrella. So just to help people like get a concept of what's happening in the world. We have 50 million people in slavery today. So 50 million is more than ever before in history. 50 million. So of that 50 million, half of them, so 25 million, are women and children, specifically in sex trafficking. 25 million. Yeah. So that's an understanding. So people are like, how did we get there? What's with those numbers? More than ever before. So I was just invited to speak at World Without Orphans and to other global leaders. And the stat that goes hand in hand with why, because this is a symptom, trafficking is a symptom. And it is people that don't know that they're being used, or they think this is all they are. And there's buyers that every buyer typically says, I don't know how I got here. I just started looking at porn. I don't know how this happened. Like, so they're progressive shades of gray that lead to places for the buyer and for the person being victimized. Usually there's sometimes fraud, deception, but coercion, but typically, I mean, 90% of the cases, it's somebody that thinks that's their boyfriend, and it's somebody that thinks it's a harmless thing. It's a trafficker. Typically the people have been abused themselves. They never got off the generational pattern. Like, I'm not gonna be the victim, I'll be the abuser. And what we know is in the world, like I shared with you, 1 out of 2, like of the 2 billion children in the world, 1 out of 2 carry a secret of, usually it begins at 3, 4, 5 years old, of some sort of abuse, physical, emotional, spiritual, verbal. And if you grow up with that secret and don't have an off ramp, what that means is you don't know who you are. You don't know.
Did you say 1 out of 2 at the age 3, 4, and 5 have a secret?
Most trauma begins at 3, 4, 5 years old. Emotional, physical, verbal, sexual. And that's why people are like, oh, we'll talk about that in high school. All of our programs start in kindergarten in perfect, no harm, beautiful language, because it's truly identity. Because what happened to you is not who you are. But it's starting. The movement's beginning of introducing this young so that the church can take back the narrative, because Satan's leading the narrative. But when this happens when you're little, they called it an orphan spirit. We have 150 million children living with, in an orphan status. That means one parent's gone or they're being raised as an orphan, but 1 out of 2 with what is called an orphan spirit. And an orphan spirit means you don't know who you are. You don't know whose you are. You don't know that you're made on purpose for a purpose. You don't know you have an enemy that has one purpose, to make sure you never get your purpose. And if we're not equipping all the children to know who they are, you're born to battle. Like, this is a war, and let me help you fight it. But we don't, because we have 1 out of 2 that have now grown up, and exponentially, how many adults do we have that don't know who they are?
Right.
They're still looking to feel something. Do I matter? Running the wrong ways, still sitting in church. So the statistics that people need to know are the stats in the church and the stats out of the church are exactly the same. 7 to 80% of men and women now addicted to pornography. Like, the grooming of what's happening exponentially online is changing neural pathways. It's changing intimacy. Like, systemically, when you talk about mountains, the mountain of intimacy and marriage and family systemically is being dismantled by the enemy, because he's getting kids at 3, 4, 5 years. 5 years old is typically a child will see something pornography, because the American Academy of Pediatrics says that 75% of 4-year-olds are given a smart device. Most parents don't know it comes preset to explicit. So, like, Disney just re-released Puss in Boots. Little kid says, show me Puss in Boots. An image comes up, an algorithm begins. We've had case after case after case where, like, a little girl was violently raped, an 11-year-old girl, by a 17-year-old boy in a high school parking lot. When interviewed, she said, it wasn't rape. He likes me. And he's like, what? They've both been watching porn since they were 5, 6, 7 years old. It's not like our airbrushed Playboy that I grew up on. I had all that stuff. What's on our phones today is abuse, twisted. So another little girl said, I'm turning sweet 16. I've had boys, they always say, boys have asked me, can you do this? Can I do this? Can you do this to me? Can we try this together? And she said, I've been used for sex more ways than I could count, but I'm still waiting for my first kiss. So what we're seeing, I know, is that little boys don't know, because nobody in the real world is talking to them. Church is like, we don't talk about sex. Oh, we're certainly not going to talk about it 5, 6, 7. They're learning online. And this is like the number one generation right now. They say they're the most connected, the loneliest. They say their best friend is someone they've never met, someone they talk to online. Like, when you interview these are the stats on this generation right now. So we're exponentially grooming more buyers. We're exponentially grooming more victims, because they don't know that they have any more worth.
I hate to say this, I'm embarrassed to say this, but this is like an aha moment for me too, is because you just said, it's almost like you just said, you better teach your kids about sex, because someone else already is, or someone else will. And it's almost like because a lot of people are shy and they'll figure it out. And you tell them the high level which we used to probably get away with. We used to get away with that. And that's probably even how it was even done. Maybe, I don't know if it was done in the Bible that way. I don't know. But now in today's society, with pornography everywhere, and that stat you just told me, about the 80% and even the pastors that are in pornography, it's like, oh my gosh. And so it becomes a norm. And the norm is now called the norm, and it's not perversion. And people don't know, just like it's just a cycle.
Confused. Yeah, they don't know. Right. Wow. And that's why, like, I could tell you when I was little and I was sexually abused by a family member that was a male when I was a little bit older. But when I was younger, I was abused by the same sex. And when same sex abuse happens, it confuses you. And I remember going, am I gay? Is she gay?
Yes.
If there was the marketing there is today, where it is in my face, I'd be a boy. I remember going to my grandma's house, like not funeral, oh my gosh, the nursing home. But like some of the old people going, oh, is it a boy or a girl? And she's like, oh, it's a girl. But I just didn't, I looked like I didn't know who I was. Think of that. I'm 55. Today, our kids, they don't need someone to physically touch them. What we're finding is with online, abuse is happening through the graphics, through what their brains are seeing. Neural pathways are changing by 8, 9 years old. So these poor little kids, if we don't talk about it, like we talk about in Real Talk, becoming the master curator of story time. Satan's telling the stories. He's leading the narrative. We have to take the narrative back. We have to. And we have to talk about how God designed sex and what intimacy is, what orgasm is, what they're finding. This is like a wild stat. Like all these stats, I'm like, geez, we got to talk about this. We have a chemical that we release. It's called oxytocin, and we release it. It's meant for bonding. So there's 2 times really that it's supposed to really come. And that is when you are breastfeeding a mom, or when a man and a woman orgasm, oxytocin is released. What we're finding in research is that children by 8, 9, 10, 11 years old are releasing oxytocin to screens. Therefore, they are not having the ability to have that intimate bonding connection in person. Yeah. So we see Viagra being marketed to 20-year-olds. Like, think of the systemic movement of the enemy to steal our children, steal marriage, which is legacy. If you don't have children, look what we're doing. We're people aren't even going to have children.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's such a passion of mine. Like, trafficking is a symptom. And yes, we want to eradicate it. But if we're going to eradicate it, we got to go all the way over here and get at the beginning of all of it.
Yeah. And we have a whole generation now, a whole cycle that has been now addicted to porn. And now we're seeing the byproduct of, before and back in the day, it was wrong back then, but it was a lot harder to access. And so now it's just all there and becomes a norm. And I've been saying that for a long time. And people, like, I even think homosexuality, big part of that is what you're watching and looking at all the time, as a symptom of that. It goes on and on. So, okay, let's dive a little deeper about how does someone become sex trafficked, and what are things that we could be looking for? What can we help? And I don't want to quite go to the systemic part yet of what you're doing, but just some of the basics. Let's say you're an uncle, you're a parent, you're a friend, and you're in the community, you care about your community. What are things that you should be aware of? And then ultimately, and then when we get there, what are some things we can do?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Like, if you're straight up just talking about sex trafficking, for 10, 11 years, I led safe housing for sex trafficking survivors, over 5,000 survivors in the streets and the jails, in our homes, all the different things. The story was the same. So the textbook, what you need to know is that, again, this is the same stats, but 3, 4, 5 years old, the child will start to be sexually abused. And that sexually abuse, I think they say 90% is by someone they know. So our whole old school of stranger danger parents, it's not stranger danger. It recently used to be who you kind of know. Now it's like definitely who you know. It's like, if they're not getting you, they'll do it online with you. But by 3, 4, 5 years old, something sexual enters with the child, and they don't know what to do. It's actually normalized because they don't know any better. And what we know statistically is by 12 to 14, when they're hitting puberty, they can't take it anymore. Usually it's, a family member, somebody that's familial, and something will break in the child. The child will get more promiscuous. So with parents, I always say, look for signs. Like, you could tell when a child, it's not just no one just becomes a bad kid. No one just becomes isolated. No one just becomes angry. No one just becomes anything. Look for a shift in your child. And so what happens then is typically they will do something to act out. And in really bad cases, the child runs away. So what it used to be it's somebody that was physically touching a child, and then they would run away, and within 48 hours on the street, 80% of runaways, doesn't matter what zip code, what country, within 48 hours, 80% of them are approached by a predator who basically says, are you hungry? I bet your parents didn't love you. I'll love you. So it's a kid running from what wasn't safe into the arms of, oh my gosh, a rescuer. That's worse. And so the stats tell you that once they're in their, web, they're sold 15 to 40 times a day. Most of our girls said 20 was their number. They had 20 transactions in a 24-hour time period. And this is a child that since they're 3, 4, 5 has been used for sex. They don't know who they are. They don't know whose they are. And they will typically stay in the life up to 7 years. And then by the time that you would get them, we did housing for 18 and older. Their little brains, they're developmentally 12. Most of them don't finish school. School misidentified them. Cops arrested them, thought they were just bad kids. I mean, doctors, the stat for ER doctors is like 90% will see a victim of sex trafficking, have no idea. They stitch them up, give them back to a predator. Like, we just haven't been equipped to know. So these kids they think it's all they're worth. And so that's why when they would come into our care, they're like, I'm just, a sex worker. I'm a prostitute. It's like, no, you're not. When you're 6 years old, is that what you wanted to be when you grew up, or what happened? And when you start helping them walk it back, they're like, wait a minute. So you got to undo it all. So for kids, I mean, it used to be someone you run away, but now everything I shared with you and we talked about online, sex trafficking, you don't even have to have someone touch you. They are so dedicated to finding a child. The stat has increased to 100,000 between last year and this year. It used to be 500,000 predators at any time are looking online for a child. Then it went up to 600,000. And literally, FBI says the most dangerous place for your child to be today is in their bedroom alone with a smart device. Because when I was at the White House for a trafficking thing a few years back, there was an Indian chief, and you hear this again and again with those that really protect and keep their kids in a bubble. He's like, I was 50 miles from the closest McDonald's, 52 miles from the closest Walmart. We were like family pride, legacy. But my daughter had a phone, and some guy on social media puts up a picture of himself as a 16-year-old. She's 15. They become friends. Most children of this generation will say their closest friend is someone they've never met online, and you don't know who that person is. And he said that this person formed a relationship for 2 years with his daughter. They will pursue 2 years. And then that his daughter brought herself. She found her own ride to McDonald's and met him and was trafficked for 2 years. So it's just such deception, telling them they're pretty. The average age a little girl posted a naked selfie 10, 12 years ago was 12 years old. Today it's 8 or 9. So on social media, at 8 or 9 years old, there's predators looking for a kid. Hey, you're pretty. They have a picture of another little boy. So there's just so many tactics. So the hope, so you're like, whoa, but here's the hope. Like the hope parents, like,
Yeah, it's time. Out. Let's switch to hope.
Flip the switch. You need to know all this because the era has passed. You would be culpable if you said, well, I didn't know. Now you know. Yeah. But the beautiful thing is there's so many tools and it's so easy to normalize it. And we have so many ways for you to just pick up conversations and just change everything. Roll it out at your church, roll it out at your school, roll it out anywhere that you have a circle of influence. And it's kindergarten through leadership because everyone needs to speak. And just one more stat, and I'm done. Like they say the average age of abuse is 3, 4, 5 years old. The average age people speak about it, 53 years old. And when we're 53, that means we've gone decades of not acknowledging because we don't have eyes to see or ears to hear. We have blind spots. So screwy. So we could flip it in a second though. And I'm telling you, when kids go through the programs that we have, they're so excited. They're like, we're going to talk. You're going to talk to me about this? I can't wait to talk to you about it. And they're hungry and starving by 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade to talk to you.
Okay. So you've made a switch in even in your approach when you first got started. And now you're going about it differently because you think you'll have greater impact. Talk to us about how you're going about it differently.
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's pretty much what I said. Like the waiting for them to need, because everyone's like, oh, let's do safe housing. I did that forever. Oh, let's help the survivors. 1% was ever found back in the day. Now 0.5% is ever found. So we can't wait to find them. It's going to get less and less and more being child pornography has gone up 15,000%. It's not getting better. So we just said, what is every system? Because every girl that I ever spoke to went to school. Every girl was arrested. Every girl went to the medical, she had medical help. Every girl went to church. Most of them went to church. And so these are the systems that just missed it. They didn't see it. And so and everything that we do is not about like, if you're sitting here right now going, oh my gosh, what did I miss? No. And it's not too late. Like it is so easy to begin these conversations and to implement these systemic changes because giving somebody tools and eyes to see that's what we're passionate about. Everything we do begins with education and it's training entire systems from the top to the bottom to have eyes to see. And then the children in schools and churches start in kindergarten and they love it. And the results are astonishing, the things that it has prevented. And parents actually feel empowered because we give you language. And so the entire systems are saying, we didn't know how to talk about it. We didn't know how to approach it. And now all of a sudden it's like, boop, turnkey, you have a handle and it's so easy. And kids are starving for you to meet them in this place because they don't want to learn from their friends. They don't want to learn online, but they don't know what else to do.
So there's someone watching right now in church security. And they actually asked, this is a real appropriate, and you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can expand upon it, do you have any pointers to what to look for? You had mentioned sudden changes, but what general things could they be looking for?
Well, it depends. Are they talking about trying to spot somebody in their system that has been used?
I think both. I think both would be appropriate what things should we looking for as someone in security, but also what are we looking for in the children?
Yeah. Well, on the security side, what I think churches and administration needs to know is that all of the screening that's out there, basically it says it catches about 4% of predators because they know how to answer. And
Yeah.
if they don't have a police record, which most don't, they
Yeah.
get through. So I think it's having different training for your staff to have eyes to see. And that's what we offer with the Real Talk package for churches. But it's looking at the kids, the ones that seem a little, it's going to sound ridiculous, but a little dirty. They might have a little bit of smell. They are overly touchy. They're inappropriately touching. You could watch with play when they're little. If they're another child touching themselves, things like that. But then that puts you immediately into, questioning and reporting. And that's why we're so much more passionate about teaching you how to start talking to the kids in kindergarten so that the kids can actually learn how to say the things they need to say so that they don't become that third grader that's sitting there that everybody could tell something's wrong, or that fifth grader. But any promiscuous behavior, the kid that is struggling, I mean, if they don't have parents present, and sometimes it's the most perfect looking parents. We have stories of girls in church that were, it was their boyfriend in the church that ended up becoming their trafficker. I think the bottom line is people are very good at camouflaging and they're very good at hiding. So it's learning how to awaken yourself to have eyes to see. Because there's textbook stuff, but they're getting more and more sophisticated. Like traffickers used to say they would farm the mall. That's where they go to look for their children. Now they say one of their number one farming places is the church.
Yep. I was gonna mention that because I saw that come up lately, especially even like in youth where they begin to establish relationships. There's not a whole lot of control there, and there's not as much watching going on. And then they connect socially on social media, and away they go. And some people are even offered money to actually go recruit.
Oh yeah.
These people. So, all right. So I think you have some resources too that I think I might even see a book up behind you. You wrote a book, right?
Yeah, 2 books, but the recent one, Speak the Unspeakable, is the one that goes with Real Talk. And honestly, at our website, the Foundation United, so you got to say the Ohio State, the Foundation.
I put it on the screen. Do you see that?
Yes, the Foundation
United.
That's it. And if you go to Awaken Faith Communities, all the steps are there. If you're like, I want to go through one of these groups because I don't even know what I don't know. Like, what if I have blind spots? You can sign up for a group. If you have a school that you have a Christian school or a secular school, we have Christian curriculum, we have secular curriculum. The Catholic Church is signed off on our secular that it could go into their their parishes and their Catholic schools. So whatever system you're connected to, we have a next step for you. So my favorite thing to say to you would be do something. Used to say, if you don't do something in the next 3 days, you won't do anything. Now they say, if you don't do something like in the next 90 seconds, their attention span's like a goldfish. So I would invite people to go to the foundationunited.org and look at our website and just see what part of it jumps out to you. Foster care system. We have tools for foster care. There's so many things, and you could instantly become an advocate. You could instantly unlock parts of yourself, and you could step into next levels that you never imagined and be a protector.
Wow. Your story is amazing. God has taken something in your life that happened. It was a great source of pain. And, you hear about even my story. You hear about stories and you hear about the Lord intervening. I'll say this again. I was especially impressed that decades later that this happened. And I just want to emphasize that to maybe someone who's watching who may have these secrets and they're like, I've had enough. Enough is enough. And these is something that's holding me back. Decades later, you can get healing and restoration. You can hear Elizabeth's story and how she got it and what she's doing about it. I encourage you to go check that out. She's a great resource. She's on a lot of popular shows. It's how I met her through a friend that she was on a show. It's actually on, I think it was on Sean Bull's show, and then some friends introduced, and I was like, wow, I'd love to talk to her. And I'm so glad I did. These statistics just roll off your tongue because it's in here for you. And then you've taken here and here, and you made something for not only that you're doing something about it, but you're becoming more almost like it's apostolic, where it's like, okay, hold on. I'm not an individual anymore. Now I've taken it to the next level so that we can do something systemically. And that's what apostles do. Apostles do something systemically because they have the bigger picture and they lead that bigger picture. So God bless you for what you're doing.
Thank you. I love talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on the show. Good night, everybody.